time after time, as the clock ticks and tocks, it is he that deity mocks, as it prepares to chop his locks. Though he stood accused, he refused to be amused, had too much soul, so they threw him in the hole, where he would not see the light of day, just the dues he'd have to pay for following the path of that self-deifying way, all the way into his judgment day.
High Priest Kwatamani, Supreme Soothsayer, Soul Seer, Spiritual Healer and Revealer, Chief Elder of the Kwatamani First Genesis Tribe, the oldest, longest sustained, raw and living, plant fuel consuming, family community order known, well over half a century, and still going strong in the tropical rainforest.
I was sitting and talking with this young man who had just finished dealing with truth and consequence. He was born gifted, but his energy shifted, and conflict, confusion, and chaos would step in as the fueling source of sin. Yeah, he was pulled off track by that opposing nature of energy on the attack. That opposing nature of energy could not be ignored after he learned to use the Ouija board, tempting him with things he could not afford. Hey, ain't trying to make no alibi, but that Ouija board teachings did not come from the I and I. Please take heed. Beware of that self-centered nature of energy that fuel and feed lust and greed. That is the Setsutic satanic seed. Now he had a fantasy of wealth that overrode the principles, morals, and values of holistic living health. He wanted a Cadillac, and he wanted that by any means deemed necessary. This was the start of his downward spiraling cycle. He had made a deal with the devil, who had messed with his head. Don't mess with mine, I won't mess with yours, is what that devil had said. And after all was said and done, that devil took his firstborn son. He had witnessed unseen communications in and between the I and unseen sources and soulful essences of energy, and he was kind of perplexed and amazed. You see, the young man had the ability to connect with unseen energies. I had taught him the principles of life, and I had also taught him the fact that there are two different natures of energy: divine order or toxic reality, supreme truth or self-deifying fallacy. Although he did look to listen and learn, he definitely did not learn to discern. Just like so many others, he wanted to have his way, totally unaware that that defiant nature of energy is what has led so many lost and astray. This has echoed from the I and I ever since a very young child. Since the first experiences that the I and I had had with an energy worker called Annie Mae Nash. What looked like hocus pocus was seen and unseen guidance into a unified focus. This energy worker had mated with Grandpa Love, and they had birthed a young daughter among many named Essie. Her bloodline, a Caribbean Taino Fanti DNA kind. Her DNA fueled that feisty type who was spiritually encoded to never give up the fight. Nah, she never did go for that invader's religious hype, although her body was stole, snatched. Her sacred ancestral soul remained intact. This sacred ancestral soul-seeing daughter, Essie, was the energy worker that birthed the son, for what it's worth, that impregnated the mother from which the I and I was birthed. Yeah, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. And I'm going to ask that you please take a little time and follow the dots of this sacred ancestral storyline as she, Essie, prophetically foretold. She would reincarnate at the exact same time and date that this first ancestral daughter would be born. This holistic living truth is oftentimes met with scorn, foreign to those whose sacred ancestral culture has been ripped, stripped, mangled, and torn. Yeah, I just want to testify. And amazingly, the entire process of this birthing experience was witnessed by so many in 1987, including this son that the I and I was now connecting with over the cell phone. Feel my tone. Sense what is going on as I continue this journey through memory lane. I want to talk about an experience that the I and I once had with great-grandma Annie Mae Nash. She spoke to I, seen and unseen, but she spoke in a different kind of a language pattern. Later, as the I and I connected with Professor Ikatir and hearing his language pattern, I remember saying, "Wow! Could you say that again, Professor?" He was dealing with music and the expressions of our griot tones. And he was in amazement that the I and I was able to connect certain kinds of griot works. What he said as he reviewed one of my texts called Griot's Works, he said a few linguistic words and tones that sounded exactly like Annie Mae Nash. Now, Annie Mae Nash had been birthed somewhere in the late 1860s. This made it easy to connect the dots to Professor Ikatir. He had been born early 1920s in Ghana, West Africa, and he was a professor at the University of Legon, a place where I later researched and lectured the Diaspora experience, all the way back to that sacred ancestral home, up the Volta, east into the Niger, up the River Nile, all the way into ancient Kemet. Wow! We honored the holy cow. So we were the sacred ancestral souls who refused to slaughter the goat, chicken, or cow. We honored the fish and the fowl. We honored the holistic living union of man, he and she. We honored Mother Earth and all living things thereof, below and above. We honored no blood sacrifice. We honored the tree of life within the heavenly bliss of our sacred garden culture, earthly paradise. All of these dots are connecting to something here. But you got to take time and listen well. You got to tune in or you're going to miss it. And you have been programmed not to be able to tune in to refined communications, which is part and parcel of your sacred ancestral tune-in device. This is why the ancient Kemetic culture was so well refined and brought such a deep-seated encode. Keep following the dotted lines, and you'll find out what this communications is all about. Getting back to this young man, he had actually had an encounter. To be brief, as a young child, he had witnessed a transformation of soul energy from his mother as her body was laid to rest. At the scene, on the scene, it was seen, live and in living color, a soul transformation to the mother carrying his sister. And believe it or not, she went into labor on the spot. Shortly thereafter, a young baby girl was born. Let truth be told. Let your mind be stable. This is not a fairy tale. No, this is not a fable. And he had not spoken with the I for a very long time because he had followed the imaginary line of oblivious nothingness that misled him into a circumstance where he had learned the lessons. So he was saying right now. And I could tell because he was receiving the blessings of being able to communicate again with the I and his family communal order. As he was communicating, this young lady that he described as absolutely stunning walked up to him, preparing to get inside of her luxury vehicle, and dropped her keys intentionally. He was standing there talking to the I on the phone. The I, as his ancestral father, was re-encoding him with the natures of his sacred ancestral presence. The vibration was to focus on recovering this masculine soul. As I said, she had dropped her keys. And then she said to him, "Oh my, you are such a handsome, strong-built man. I thought you had enough masculine integrity that you would have picked up my keys." And he looked at her, stunned, talking to I on the phone now. And he said, as I recall, "Papa, excuse me." Then he said to the sister, "I was waiting for you to bend over and pick up those keys from the position I'm standing in. I know it would have made my body feel so calm, baby, please, because I'm thirsty." Then he said to this luscious, precious expression of femininity, "Hey, baby, is it really like that?" And she said, "Why don't you take the time and find out?" She did not know nothing about him, and he did not know nothing about her as it related to their soul-to-soul relationship, the focal point that they should have been on. What he knew about her was she was physically built to a T, and she felt like he had the kind of masculine infrastructure that would bring her the pleasure that she was seeking at that time. And besides, males of a masculine melanated tone was very hard to find. They had become all kinds of things other than the expression of masculinity. And he didn't know because he had been away for 11 years or so. And desperation was in her eyes. And neither of them knew what that holistic living desperation was all about. They did not realize that there was a desperate call that interfaced with that old lady that was at least 100 years old when I communicated with she. And when she said to I, "My great-grandson," You have been encoded with the nature of energy to assist in getting the sacred ancestral soulful essence of the children of the sun back in focus, on track, performing the holistic living act of selectively breathing a new consciousness into every offspring and vibration of the generation next. I mean, this is actually what this old lady soul spoke to I. You see, this old lady did not ask, is you the one? Is you the one? But rather, she told the I and I what it is that need to be done. And now I was encountering this son of I, and I had a mission. And she gave I the directive to that mission. The first point of reference of this mission was to comprehend that man, he and she, is a product of his and or her environment, and as such, a creature of habits. Habits are hard to break. Pay close attention, because every day of your life, you're encountering so many different encodes up on this earth at this particular point in time. We're being allowed to break the codes of that toxic nature and that Genesis 2 expression. What we're doing here is testing your ability to follow the dotted lines. Back to the first part of this story. This old lady had encoded a nature of energy encoded in her and passed forward, because in order for man, he and she, to break the codes of toxic disorder, we're going to have to produce offsprings. And those offsprings will have to be encoded with the principles, morals, and values. We're talking attitudes and behaviors of strong parenting relationships, taking the action of producing offsprings. And those grandparents will then have to be the grandparenting nature of that first generation of 7 generations of offspring that would have to be re-encoded again and again and again, through each parent becoming a grandparent. And then those grandparents focus on bringing the higher peace conscious nature of those offsprings to a greater presence. In other words, as our ancestors had said, it takes a village, a family communal order, to breed, seed, and feed a wholesome offspring. And if we do not get to that nature of breeding, seeding, and feeding a new generation of higher peace conscious thought and reasoning and action into every offspring and vibration of the generation next, we are doomed to self-destruction. That young male was spellbound by a feminine she. She was a lonely female who happened to have had a certain kind of body shape that fit his attitude, his values, his behaviors, and his beliefs at the time. And besides that, he had been locked away from femininity for a very long time. Connect this dot. There was a time when the children of the sun were invaded and intruded upon by body snatchers. That's right, hunting, herding, warring tribes and clans, snatching bodies, enslaving them to fuel his own existence. He needed free labor. And in order to do that, he would have to breed a new consciousness that would actually fit his description of what these beings should be as a nature given to him by his God to serve his purpose. This particular storyline now connects with this young man and this young female who, needless to say, was suffering from a lack of focused attention and experience that had taken this male away from she and locked him into a pit locking his soul into a holding tank, placing him into a consciousness that would lead directly to oblivious nothingness. And she was left to wander alone in a toxic zone that was orchestrated to use her to breed, seed, and feed the consciousness of a nature opposed to her existence. And she would do that because after being broken and separated from her sacred ancestral masculine he, she would lose all of her sacred ancestry, birthed time and time again by an opposing nature of energy that would rip, strip, rape, misuse, and abuse her into a stage where she would become a vessel, encoded to breed a nature totally opposed to her own existence as a divine child of the sun, totally disconnected from her sacred garden culture presence, disregarding consuming from the fruits of the tree of life, re-encoded to actually think that dead, devitalized, and depleted food substance could be described as soul food. These would be the food substances that would be used to rip, strip, and rape the soul of her existence out of her. So that then he would walk around as a physical being, partially empty of his soulfulness, and she would walk around as an empty vessel, partially ripped and tore from the essence of her soul wholeness. And when they meet, the only thing that they would actually be able to connect with would be the physical presentation of he and she. And he having a hard on because she looked like a moment of pleasure. And she being hot, sticky, and wet because she wanted to be loved by a man. She wanted someone who could connect with the inner soul that she had gotten so disconnected from. She didn't even recognize it anymore. And simply by looking at he and seeing him with his locks, her imagination actually took her there, where she felt like she was connecting with a real man because he had kept his body fit. Yeah, he was muscle bound. And when she looked at him, she saw that in front, below his waist, there was something stomping and jumping, and she felt like, wow, it must be love. That's all she had. She couldn't relate to anything else. She felt like he wants me. He must be, maybe he's my soulmate. So they were connecting physical to physical, mind to mind, body to body, seeking out whole soul mating relationship. That was an impossibility. Why? Because in order to reconnect with the whole soul essence of who we be as man, he, and she, detoxing and purging to heal from that lower and lesser nature of energy is an absolute necessity, or there will never ever be any sacred ancestral recovery, only a continuation of the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. Insanity. Because that is what will be bred into every offspring and vibration of the generation next and next and next, until or unless a miraculous occurrence happens to break the codes of that toxic nature. We must all remember, a child learned by example. Therefore, the example that we teach is encoded through he and she as they interface and interrelate with each other. Remember the saying, let us make man in our own image, and therefore we must comprehend the image that we are sending forward into every offspring and vibration of the generation next. Hey, grandsons and granddaughters, let's reconnect the dots of sacred order so we can take the pathway of holistic living, understanding as to where we must go from here. Yeah, I could feel that sun, trapped in that toxic zone, wrapping this and that to I and I, our main line of relating, communicating over cell phone. Yeah, I could feel those ancestors, that great-great-grandmama. I could feel the grandmama. And oh my goodness, I could feel those great-great-grandfathers, those who had that connection and wanted to make sure that he had a place for his soul journey to continue. I could feel that love supreme. I could feel this connection to this son that was now lingering on the telephone, trying to decide how he would connect with his sacred ancestry after all of the conflict, confusion, and chaos. Yeah, the nature of this communication was real. From his heart and soul, I could feel his appeal. No ands, ifs, and buts about it. His time had come to detox, purge, and heal. We have work to do. The dynamic birth of masculine and feminine energy rebirthed into man, he and she. And we were given the divine, natural, innate duty, obligation, and responsibility to go forward and multiply this holistic living presence of divine order into every offspring and vibration of the generation next, he and she, consuming of the fruits of the tree of life. As for that great-grandmama, Annie Mae Nash, she went full circle, reincarnating as the sacred ancestral soul of my youngest daughter, Annie, 360 degrees, all the way forward into the heavenly bliss of our sacred garden culture, earthly paradise. Annie, somebody call Granny. Tell her to bring my coconut. Safeguarded by sacred ancestral, masculine and feminine eldership. Madasi baby.
Yo, mate, me akwawo.